the worst thing your family ever planned for you? When I turned 17, my parents told me I'd be marrying my cousin Thomas the day after graduation because our family needed to preserve our superior bloodline through strategic breeding. My mother came from a wealthy Southern family that still acted like the Civil War never ended and believed they carried special genes that made them natural-born leaders. Dad was a geneticist who'd been fired from 3 universities for his racial theories, but continued his research in our basement laboratory. They'd spent my whole childhood collecting DNA samples from family members and creating breeding charts that covered our dining room walls. According to their calculations, Thomas and I would produce children with the highest concentration of what they called founding stock genetics. Thomas was 28 and had been grooming me since I was 12 under the guise of cousin bonding time. He'd take me on drives where he'd explain how lucky I was to be chosen as his future breeding partner and describe in detail how many children we'd have. 6 minimum, he'd say while rubbing my shoulder. Maybe 8 if your hips develop properly. My parents encouraged these meetings and would leave us alone in the house for hours despite my obvious discomfort. Mom would dress me up before he arrived and remind me to be sweet to my future husband. They'd already picked out the wedding venue at our family's old plantation and sent save the dates to other families in their genetic preservation network. The planning accelerated when I turned 17 and they started preparing me for my breeding duties. Mom took me to a special doctor who examined my reproductive system and declared me optimal for childbearing. This doctor wasn't licensed anymore, but my parents trusted him because he shared their beliefs about racial purity and genetic superiority. He prescribed vitamins to enhance my fertility and gave my parents a breeding calendar marked with my most fertile days. Thomas started visiting more frequently and would openly discuss our future children's genetics at family dinners. Our firstborn will have the perfect Nordic features, he'd announce while my parents beamed with pride. We're going to restore this family to its former glory through selective breeding. I tried telling teachers at school, but my parents had already spread the story that I was mentally fragile and prone to making up lies for attention. They donated so much money to the school that administrators wouldn't risk losing their funding by investigating. When I begged my older brother for help, he just shrugged and said he'd married his second cousin last year, so what was the big deal? The whole family was in on this sick tradition and treated me like a prize heifer being prepared for market. Mom started homeschooling me senior year to prevent outside influence and keep me under constant supervision. She'd make me read books about genetic superiority and quiz me on family bloodlines going back 10 generations. The isolation was suffocating, and I spent hours staring out my bedroom window, planning escape routes that seemed impossible. Everything changed when I found my grandmother's hidden diary in the attic while looking for escape money. She'd documented decades of forced marriages and what happened to girls who refused. 3 of my aunts had tried to run away and been brought back for correction procedures that left them unable to have children. Another cousin who'd fallen in love with someone outside the approved genetic pool had died in a suspicious accident 2 weeks before her forced wedding. The diary contained names and dates and photos of bruised girls who'd tried to resist. My grandmother had helped several escape but was caught and subjected to electroshock therapy until she forgot their names. The last entry was a warning to any girl who found this. They will kill you before they let you contaminate the bloodline. Each page revealed another horror about my family's breeding program and the lengths they'd go to preserve their twisted legacy. I contacted one of the escaped cousins using a code from the diary, and she told me about an underground network that helped girls from families like ours. She'd been living under a fake identity for 10 years, but said the freedom was worth always looking over her shoulder. We arranged for her to pick me up during Thomas's next visit, when my parents would be distracted by wedding preparations. The plan was simple, but required perfect timing, and I spent days memorizing every detail. But somehow they found out about the diary and the escape plan. When Thomas arrived that day, he wasn't alone. He'd brought 2 other cousins and medical equipment that made my blood freeze. Mom locked the doors while Dad explained they'd moved up the wedding to tonight because I'd proven myself too unstable to wait any longer. We'll do the ceremony first, Dad said, pulling out leather restraints from a medical bag. Then Thomas will consummate immediately to ensure pregnancy before you try anything else stupid. They started setting up an IV drip, and Thomas smiled at me while preparing a syringe. Don't worry, cousin. The sedatives will make you more cooperative for breeding. I backed against the wall, but there was nowhere to run with 3 men blocking every exit. Mom held my arms while Thomas approached with the needle. Just a little prick, he whispered, and then you'll be mine forever. Full story on the channel below.